Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In our last video, we broke down everything we liked about the last episode of the Star Wars Rebels series. There was a lot to like, but there were also a few things I didn't like, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. Now I realize Rebels is a cartoon, which means it's mainly for kids, but the series takes a hit from how absurd some of the battles are. Basically, no matter what happens, the Rebels rarely ever get hit by enemy fire. At least in the Clone Wars series, occasionally a Jedi would die, and clone troopers would routinely get mowed down. Come to think of it, a clone trooper also dies in the finale for Rebels, so I guess even making it through the Clone Wars and Order 66 doesn't save you from being a clone, aka cannon fodder. Rest in peace, Gregor. You had the coolest shirt in all of Star Wars, but you also had the coolest armor, which you probably should have worn on that last mission. But besides Gregor, everyone else made it through this extremely deadly operation. Once again, I do get it, it's for kids, but have you spoken to a kid lately? They're really not that naive. Have you seen the kind of violent video games they're playing? They're so realistic and so awesome. In all seriousness, though, we should be teaching kids that there are consequences to reckless frontal attacks on well-guarded locations. I mean, what does the Spectre assault on the Imperial Command Center really show us? That it's easy to pull off a daring raid? Maybe we should all go to our local bank and try to rob it. Heck, why stop there, kids? Let's go to our local military bases and take them over. The real question is the Rebel series encouraging kids to carry out random acts of terrorism? JK. At least in Rogue One, when Jyn, Erso, and the crew pulled off that crazy stunt on Scarif, they all died. While the Rebels in the series never seem to suffer from their actions, the violence and destruction they carry out against their enemies is real, and any moral high ground that the Rebels had occupied has now been destroyed. In one last big hurrah symbolizing Lothal's freedom from the Empire, the Spectres managed to lure every Imperial in the area into a giant flying dome, launch that dome a few hundred feet in the air, and then just blow them up. This is probably one of the most messed up scenes in the entire series. Now, if you wanted to show us that the Rebels are a bunch of cold-blooded murderers, then great job, Dave Filoni, but I don't think you meant to do that. If you think about it, they just killed several thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Imperials without any warning. They didn't even give them an opportunity to surrender. And on top of that, instead of just blowing up the dome on the ground where the damage would have been limited to the immediate area, they purposely launched the dome into the air and then blow it up, showering the entire city with burning debris, shrapnel, body parts, and all that other great stuff. Now, if that strategy sounds a bit familiar, well, it is. It's the same way we detonate atomic bombs and other ordnances, because airbursts spread out damage and kill more people. Now, I know Captain Rex says that the dome is gaining altitude over the sea, but I think what he meant to say is it's gaining altitude above sea level, because that dome is clearly still in the middle of the city when it detonates. And if that wasn't bad enough, not only did Imperial soldiers get killed, that station was full of non-combat personnel, including medical officers, clerks, civilian contractors, and also we have to mention all the people on the ground who were crushed by falling debris. This is a colossal act of terrorism that belongs right next to the destruction of the first and second Death Star. And depending on who you ask, that really fits the Rebels well, or doesn't fit their character at all. And of course, the Rebels aren't even troubled a little bit by their actions, despite the fact that behind every Stormtrooper helmet is a human, just like you and me. Now, my other problem with this episode and the series in general is how they portray Thrawn. While most of the time they do a good job depicting him as a cold, calculating, strategic genius, sometimes they make the mistake of letting Thrawn do some very generic bad guy stuff, like raining down turbo lasers on a city for no reason. Thrawn doesn't do anything without reason. He's not cruel or vindictive, he rarely gets angry, and he doesn't slaughter people for his own amusement. There was no other reason for Thrawn to bombard the city other than to make him look like some cruel, terrible person. The real Thrawn would have just sent a pair of turbo laser bolts straight at the Imperial Command Center bridge and killed the Rebels, ending the insurgency then and there. Thrawn ends up turning Ezra into the Emperor, or at least a holographic version of the Emperor. In the previous video, I talked about how much I love the scene, but there was one thing that I didn't like. The whole not going back into the past to save your loved ones thing was already done just 2 episodes ago. It was an extremely emotional and impactful moment, especially because the person Ezra had an opportunity to save was Kanan, who was a father-like figure and Ezra's Jedi Master. And unlike Ezra's parents, all the viewers knew Kanan and grew attached to him in the last 4 seasons. Seeing him ripped away was probably traumatizing for some people, and then seeing Ezra have the opportunity to bring him back was just rubbing salt into the wound. When Ezra has that opportunity to save his parents, we just don't care about them that much. It also feels like we've been there just 2 episodes ago. We knew Ezra didn't save Kanan. Why would we expect him to treat his parents any differently? Now, everything I mentioned up to this point was just nitpicking. I thoroughly enjoyed the last episode. But if there is one thing that really pisses me off about Star Wars Rebels and this episode, it's space whales. Space whales are stupid. I hate space whales. I hated them before and I hated them now. I would love to go on a hunting expedition to kill space whales. So here's what I propose. Let's assemble a super team of Japanese fishermen, Eskimo seal clubbers, put them on a few Corellian freighters, and have them chase and hunt down all of these stupid space whales. They're super annoying and always running around into hyperspace lanes getting people killed. I'm willing to accept some of the fantasy elements in Star Wars. I'm not a sci-fi purist. I think there's room for some magical stuff to happen. But whales who can breathe in space and fly in vacuum is where I draw my line. The fact that they can go into hyperspace is just beyond stupid. And it's really stupid that turbo lasers can't take them out, while they can take out an entire fleet of Imperial Star Destroyers. And what is the point of the space whale anyway? Can you merchandise these things? Does a kid actually want to buy a hybrid whale squid thing? And did Ezra even need to call them in to help him? Once he reached the bridge, he basically could have taken Thrawn as hostage and forced the Imperial fleet to withdraw or surrender. Did he really need to have the Purgles come and kill everyone? And then after the space whales destroyed everything, why didn't Ezra stop them from transporting everyone into hyperspace? Surely he could have communicated with the whales right and said something like, "Oh, there's no windows on this ship. If you go into hyperspace, it's going to kill me." When we watch these kind of cartoons, we have to keep in mind who the audience is and not be too critical. Alan. In all seriousness though, Dave Filoni, in your next Star Wars cartoon venture, please do try to make things a little bit more realistic, and let's stay away from space whales. If you guys found this episode to be a bit too negative, check out our Everything Right version of this video in the link down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe and like us on Facebook. Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.